a judge gave him an unconditional discharge, meaning essentially he's spared any penalty whatsoever. There's a minor thing around whether or not he can own a gun as a felon. But apart from that, no jail term, no fine, no real penalty for the crimes that he was convicted of. How do you feel about a convicted felon running the world without, it seems, any consequence? I say running the world, that's a bit flippant, I suppose. He's not literally running the world, but, running America is a bit like running the world. It's running the world's most powerful country. He's going to have influence over us in the UK, whether we like it or not. He's going to have influence over many, many world events. Should a convicted felon really be in that position of power? Do you think, though, maybe on the other side of this, that actually this is all politicised, that the courts ended up being used as a weapon against Donald Trump by those who oppose him? Let me know what you think. 0345 6060 973. You can text me 84850. Caroline's already been on to me this morning saying money kept Trump out of prison. It's about how much money you got and who you are. If that was a normal guy off the street, you'd be doing life in prison. So Caroline certainly thinks it's double standards here. Let's start this conversation this morning with Dr. Richard Johnson, who's a lecturer in US politics at Queen Mary University. And we've also got Greg Swenson this morning, who's head of Republicans overseas. Morning to both of you. Dr. Richard Johnson, I want to start with you. Just to explain this case a little bit, is it literally the case that Donald Trump faces no consequences whatsoever for his crimes?
No, the judge's ruling doesn't mean that he's not a felon. He remains a felon. It just means that the state of New York decided that it was not in the interest of the state to incarcerate him. And that means that for the rest of Donald Trump's life, he carries the penalties that any felon would encounter. That might be civic penalties, such as not being able to serve on a jury. It might be certain exercise political rights, like not being able to buy a gun. It also could impact on his travel. Many countries require you to declare whether you have a criminal record when you fill out a visa waiver if you come to the United Kingdom or to Canada from the United States. So there are some penalties that he would face, but of course, compared to what was potentially on the table, which would have been a very lengthy prison sentence and a fine that for most people would be a significant fine, but not a big fine for Donald Trump. He has evaded those.
So none of these things really hinder his presidency. And actually, that is something the judge had to take into account, wasn't it? That the judge sort of had to balance three things, really, to fulfill constitutional duties. Donald Trump has to be able to fulfill his constitutional duties as president of America. Obviously, there's the rule of law here too, to be balanced as well against that, and respect for the verdict delivered by the jury, deference to the rule of law. But it was a difficult balance to strike, I guess. I mean, if Donald Trump had been sentenced, for example, to a prison term, then how on earth would he be able to discharge his duties as US president?
Well, quite right. And this is a state crime as well, which also adds to a certain degree of deference that states show to the federal system and to the president of the United States. And I mean, what the Supreme Court showed in their ruling this summer in Trump versus United States is that really the way where they said that the president is immune for official acts that he conducted as president. Now, that didn't apply in this case because this was happened before he was president. It was a state case. But the underlying fact of it is that if you want to hold a president accountable for misdeeds they did in office, then you need to do that through the political process. You need to impeach them. That really seems to be the only way that you hold a president accountable. And actually, when Richard Nixon said when the president does it, it means it's not illegal, he was actually right in that sense. And so the way that you punish a president is through the impeachment process.
Okay, well, look, let's put some of this also to Greg Swenson, who joins us too. Thanks so much for joining us, Greg. Do you think that Donald Trump was essentially given special leeway here, and that he hasn't been held to the same standards that other people would be?
No, not at all. In fact, this case never would have been brought on anyone except for Donald Trump. So, and the natural, for this alleged crime, that there would be like maybe a slap on the wrist and $100 fine. I mean, this was a misdemeanor bookkeeping entry violation, and which, yes, is against the law in New York. That is true, but it is a misdemeanor level crime. So they elevated it to a felony through a series of connections to other alleged crimes, and then split it into 34 felonies because I think there was 34 separate payments made at the time. But it was a bookkeeping entry. So when Hillary Clinton did this same very similar crime in 2016, she paid a fine. She got a misdemeanor charge for bookkeeping and paid a fine. She mislabeled a payment to her law firm, which was actually a payment to the Steele dossier people. And yeah, is it wrong? I guess, if you want to argue that. So, but even if it was a crime, the appropriate penalty is basically a slap on the wrist, and yeah, he's a convicted felon now, and that's one of the reasons they rushed to get the verdict. I'm sorry, to get the sentencing done. But essentially, it's meaningless. That there's no, because as you said, we all agree there's no jail time, there's no fine. There wouldn't be if this was not Donald Trump. Any argument that he got off the hook easily because of who he is or he has money is laughable.
I think it's the reverse, that he was treated more harshly.
The opposite, yeah.
I mean, I suppose the question is he gonna do the same to other people when he's in office, right? Because there's been talk of going after Donald Trump's opponents in the courts. Aren't we just seeing the increased weaponization of the court system, whether it's against Donald Trump or whether it's him using it against his opponents? Is he going to do that, do you think?
I don't know, and I don't think so. He might go after someone that clearly violated the law or clearly abused the law. But I don't think he'll just go after opponents. It's got to be both. I mean, I surely don't think he'll go after someone just because they're political opponents. If there was some grotesque violation of or weaponization of the legal system, possibly, but I doubt it. I mean, we went through this with Hillary Clinton, who had all kinds of headaches and problems in 2016 and 17, and the Trump Justice Department just basically let her slide. So I think he'll do pretty much the same again, unless there's something really grotesque.
Yeah, and he's going to pardon, we assume, a lot of the Capitol rioters as well from 2020.
Yeah, I think
2021.
I mean, I'm curious to see what happens. I think what I expect is that he'll pardon the nonviolent or the ones that did not. Yeah, the nonviolent ones, which there are many who were trespassing, yes, but trespassing is something you.
But my point is, everyone's using the court system for their own gain, aren't they? It's quite depressing, really, because I know things work slightly differently in America, only slightly differently to how they work in the UK. But here, the court system is completely separate in theory to the political process. It's supposed to be one of the checks and balances in the US as well. It's supposed to be free of political interference, and yet actually everyone's just using it for their own gain.
I think that's one of the flaws with having elected judges, and you saw that in New York with Alvin Bragg, whose campaign theme was "I'm going to get Trump." That's probably not something that I think is healthy for the justice system. So, yeah, in some places that are clearly weighted toward one party, like Manhattan in New York, it's tough to get a fair trial if you're Donald Trump or if you're a Republican, and that's because the Justice Department or the judges run, many of them backed by George Soros money. It would be I would argue virtually impossible for a Republican to win in certain precincts, and I think that the borough of Manhattan in New York City, voted 92% for Biden. And that jury pool, in fact, in this case was 90% Biden voters. So it is a bit of a challenge. It's a bit of a flaw. It's imperfect.
Dr. Johnson, what do you make of the politicization of the legal system in the US? Has it always been this way, or do you think it's become increasingly weaponized, the court system, to go after political opponents?
Well, at the state level, it has been politicized for a long time because the prosecutors in most states and judges in many states, well, in the majority of states, judges face some form of election. So you can't really take politics out of a system where the legal system is elected in one form or another. I think what has changed, though, perhaps, is that at the federal level now, there is more of a willing to, there's been more of a willing to use the resources of the federal government to put, the other side under scrutiny. Now, that's always been the case to a certain extent, and that's actually part of the case. That's part of the system working in the sense that Congress has always had the ability to have hearings and to investigate the executive branch. When Congress is in the hands of one party and the White House is in the hands of another, you would expect that to happen more frequently. But they're not. But I think what's happened now is particularly with the media environment that we have, where there are so many more kind of echo chambers, that level of scrutiny just gets heightened, and the stakes, I think, have been raised much higher than they used to be.